So let's start. First, I want to introduce myself. My name's Robert Yang. I'm the founder, co-founder, and we partnering with Momentum Labs and Abigail's with Momentum Labs. And what we're doing together is to be a resource for mental performance development for youth athletes. And we're doing this in two ways. I'll just give you a high overview. We're doing this through coaching via one-on-one coaching workshops and also in development for a personalized AI coach that the kids can use. And then we're also building a community for parents and youth coaches to kind of bring them together to have conversations with our team of performance coaches to help them better understand the science of mental performance. So today we have Abigail here. We're happy to have her give a presentation on empowering female athletes. She's a former athlete. Right now, she's a professor at the University of Michigan, but before then, I'll have her tell you she had a lot of roles in the athletic department. So I think we're really glad to have her here and share her knowledge and experience. So I'll turn it over to Abigail now.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share my screen. Thanks, Robert. I'm really excited to be here tonight. I think this is a topic that's always been really near and dear to my heart, not only as a female athlete myself, but also as a mother and also as a coach. And just seeing the importance of how empowering female athletes on and off the field can make a significant difference in their overall health, their wellness, and ultimately their life experiences. So I'll be talking a little bit about those things today. I know we don't have much time together, but we've got enough time. And in the time that we do have, we're going to use it wisely. That's the plan. Okay, so let me just share my screen.
One thing, maybe before we start, do we want to just take a little roll call or just maybe in the chat? Are we all coaches in here or there's a mix of parents also in here? Maybe we can kind of know who we're talking to.
Sure. So either by, dropping into the chat or just unmuting yourself, if you want to share a little bit about your role as it relates to sport or supporting female athletes, that would be awesome. Monica, you said you and your husband are doing some coaching, right?
We both are retired elementary school teachers. And so we spent the better part of 30 years teaching and coaching elementary level boys and girls all throughout our careers. Rob, actually, he can take it a little further than that. He's coached more than I have out in the community and with like sort of more rep or club level athletes. But so we could coach boys and girls, but we're both parents of two kids, one of them being a daughter and both of them being athletes. So we're in somewhat the same hat that you are. I am anyways.
Awesome. Wonderful. And then Colin or Donovan, if you want to share, it seems like folks are putting things in the chat as well, which is great. Okay. I'm just going to share a little bit about who I am. So as Robert said, I am a professor at the University of Michigan, primarily in the School of Social Work. I spend a lot of my time teaching, but I also spend a significant amount of my time creating programming as the director of undergraduate minor programs and the director of our sports social work certificate program here at the University of Michigan. I am the former chief diversity officer, assistant associate athletics director, and director of mental health and high performance for Michigan Athletics. So proud to say that during my tenure there, we had a couple national championships, record-breaking Big Ten championships and conference championships. And I think the really cool thing about breaking those records is the records that we were breaking were when I was a student athlete here at Michigan. So it was really interesting, one, to see how long they stood. They stood about 20 years plus, and then to be able to contribute in both the mental health and high performance space. So it's been a pure honor to work with athletes, administrators, and coaches across not just collegiate sport, but 6 major sports leagues. So doing a lot of work. And the one thing I will say, in my time doing this, I've been doing this work for almost 20 years. I've seen a lot of changes. But there's one thing that's always been really consistent and has been essential And that has been to embrace and empower female athletes to achieve success. And I can think back to my coaches and how they fostered my development, their names, when they coached me, the years they coached me, how I played, those folks were remarkable, and they impacted my life to present day. And I can also tell you the ones that didn't, and the impact that had on my life today and how I view the world. And so I think, what's become really critical is how can we collectively, one, empower female athletes to perform their best, but also be the best version of themselves. And then the other side of it is what types of characteristics are really unique to females, and how can we help create a program that fosters success in a holistic perspective, right? So we're looking at their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health, their spiritual health, and all the things that align with it. And then that brings me to well, what do we need to know to get started tonight? And this is the professor in me, so bear with me here. These are my stats that I think are really important and pivotal. When we think about female student athletes, or just student athletes as a whole, these numbers have always been really daunting to me, that about 70% of kids are dropping out of organized sports by the age of 13. It's actually quite devastating. And I think many of us can reflect on, there used to be a campaign that was hosted. It was called Don't Quit Kid, because they were really trying to keep kids involved in sport, because they were seeing just the alarming rate of young children pulling out of sport prematurely. And when I think about young girls in particular, that 45% of most girls quit by the age of 14 due to low body confidence, I think, what could we do in earlier stages of their development to promote body positivity, and not really even focusing on their body, right? But to really start to embrace who they are and the body that they're coming into, and support that journey so that they don't, what we have been calling it, retire or quit early. And then I think we all know those statistics, right? About how only 1 in 3 go on to play varsity sports in college, and less than 2% of all kids are playing at a Division I level. And in many situations, that's the dream when you're younger, right? You want to play Division I, you want to go to the Olympics, you want to win a Super Bowl, all of these different things that are very, very important to kids. And over time, they lose that passion and they lose that motivation because of different barriers that arise. And I think the one thing that a lot of us don't think about is the fact that athletes really don't hit their peak performance levels until they're 20 or 30. And that's one of the big changes that we are seeing. I think back to Olympic years and years ago, and they'll talk about how, she's 20 years old, she's a gymnast, she's just at the end of her career, and we are literally watching in front of us today with our own eyes how, as you continue to age, you are hitting your peak physical performance at a much later period of time than what we originally anticipated. So I started to really think, why are female athletes quitting, in particular female athletes? And these are the responses that have been received from surveys. The first being that they lost the passion for their sport. And so for us, it's going to be really important to figure out, how do we continue to foster the reasons why? To keep them connected to sport in a way that really helps embrace their commitment, their interest, their love, their excitement, right? I don't know how many times I've met with athletes that are like, I'm just tired, right? The burnout is there. The burnout is real. And sometimes that comes from redundancy in training schedules. Sometimes it comes from an increase in other areas of interest, right? As they get older, they're exposed to more. But the burnout is one thing that's causing that loss of passion. And so how can we keep sport fun and challenging, motivating them to continue? The other thing that we hear a lot is that the pressure got too high and therefore it became unmanageable. Many of our athletes expect a lot from themselves. And sometimes what they're expecting doesn't match where they're currently at developmentally, or where they're at in terms of access to certain training opportunities. So I spend a lot of time speaking to coaches and soccer parents, because my daughter is a soccer player, about how can we reduce the pressure for them so that we can help things be a little bit more manageable. Now, what I mean when I say that, I was talking to a parent. She's also a coach, a high school coach. And she said, we're sitting here at a U8 soccer match. And everyone's putting so much pressure on their kids, like we're training for the Olympics today. And I sat back and I started to observe, right? I think that's my assessment hat that went on. I started to observe and I was like, she's right. Someone missed a shot. It was like, oh no, it wasn't let's go. You got it. Keep it up. Keeping people motivated. So when the pressure gets too high, it's no longer fun. And in those earlier stages of development, you're really trying to get to those places where it is enjoyable before it becomes technical and tactical, right? We also see a lot of people leave sport because it's no longer affordable, right? People aren't meeting their goals. And I think a lot of times female athletes are leaving their goals because they haven't set goals, which is why setting goals has become so essential to the mental performance role that we take. If we've got some really clear and what we would often say is SMART goals, right? So they're specific, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, we've got a time on them. We know what we're working towards. And more specifically, if we can even dial it down a little more, how and what steps are we going to take to meet those bigger overarching goals, right? So how can we actually break it down to make them more achievable faster, to keep people more engaged and more motivated, right? Because if you can reach those small steps along the way, you'll be more motivated to continue on. Time management. I don't know how many former athletes we have on tonight's video or call, but I will say when we're training several hours a week, I look back on it and I'm like, there are times when I was training, 30, 40 hours a week. It's a full-time job. And then sometimes you're going to school too, and sometimes you're working and all these other things. How can you manage your training in a way that actually you're getting the most out of it? And I think historically we thought like the more you train, the stronger you'll be, the better you'll be. And we've even talked to folks, our Olympians, our folks that are top tier that are recognizing that's not necessarily true. It's not just how they train, it's how they recover, it's how they sleep, it's how they eat. And unfortunately, poor sleep is a huge part of why female athletes are quitting, to the point where if you ask female athletes how many of them are sleeping less than 8 hours a day, it's about one and a half to 2 times less than your general population. That's a lot. So sleep is becoming secondary to everything else. It's the first thing to go. And then food and hydration. And if we know that those things are actually the key to success in sport, we're going to see people then have health-related issues, more injuries, decline in mental health and functioning. And unfortunately, it becomes kind of a domino effect. So that when we think about our female athlete development, I'm a huge fan of Erickson. Anyone that has heard me talk and will hear me talk in the future will probably hear me talk about Erickson. But Erickson really talks about these different stages of development in youth. And so what's important for us are the stages of where the youth currently is, are we utilizing that stage to help promote improved outcomes? Are we utilizing that stage to help identify what specific, I just realized I have a typo here. What specific goals are they trying to achieve, and does it match where they are developmentally? So when we think about this long-term athlete development is about starting young and having fun, and then learning how to train, training to train, becoming more and more competitive. Then we train to win, and then we're active for life, right? So that once an athlete, always an athlete really comes in here. But we've got to make sure that developmentally we're working with our athletes and fostering their development with where they are at in their lives. Because when we start to mismatch, it can cause a lot of frustration. It can cause a great deal of stress. And then ultimately, our athletes are feeling less empowered. So when we think about empowerment, just from like a definition standpoint, I think it becomes really critical for us to focus on what type of authority and power are we promoting and giving to our athletes so that they can do something. And that something is what their goals are, right? What they're trying to work towards, what they're trying to achieve, which will help them over time become stronger and more confident and ultimately feel more in control. Monica talked earlier about controlling the controllables. When people feel out of control, their stress is up, They are more prone to injury. Their sleep is disrupted. They're not performing as well as they could. So if we can really work on increasing authority and autonomy and, helping remind them that this internal strength can help promote confidence, we are going to see our female athlete not only have more fun, but engage in their sport more competitively and for longer terms. So this is the time I want to talk a little bit about strategies. And these are the three that I chose to focus on today. There's many, many strategies, but these are probably the ones that I have found to be most effective in my 20 plus years of coaching and teaching and working with athletes. And I guess even if we go back further, my own athletic career. So building trust, positive coaching or parental support, and mentorship. These are three significant strategies that are helping our female athletes really develop and evolve. So when we think about building a trusting relationship first, I always find it very interesting because I'll talk to folks and they'll say, oh, well, they can trust me. And I'm like, well, anyone can say that, but how are you going to show it? So how are we teaching coaches? How are we as performance coaches or supports or parents? How are we showing up as dependable and consistent? Okay. That's one thing that's going to really show that trust will exist. That's the foundation. Without trust, you can't build a relationship. Without a relationship, you can't build success. And so when we've got that, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Like safety comes first. This really helps us recognize that if we're going to share, I'm going to do this for you, we're keeping our promises. When we say I'm going to show up, we need to show up and be present. So that consistency helps build reliability and trust in those relationships with our athletes. And so that's something that's become really important, especially for coaches. The other thing that I think is really important about being genuine and showing interest in when we're offering support and how we offer support. So when we are learning about our athlete, who they are, not just as athletes, but beyond, are we showing genuine interest, right? Are we able to show up and really understand who they are and what values they continue to aspire to achieve? And then how can we bring that in to their training setting? How can we bring that into the performance coaching that we're doing? Or as a parent, when we say, how was practice? We're not just saying it to kind of say like, oh, how's your day going? We're genuinely interested in how they're performing and what they're doing and what their experience has been so that we can respond in a way that's adequate. I think that really helps with the next one, communicating openly and honestly. I always say, active listening means we spend a lot of time hearing, and hearing isn't just like, I hear you speak. It's, I am listening, I'm trying to understand, and then I'm trying to engage with what you're telling me so that people can feel like they can be transparent with us. And I think that's really key, both as a performance coach, but ultimately as anyone that's supporting a female athlete in this space. Respect is huge, respecting time and commitment. We put a lot into sport at all angles. And so really encouraging balance and showing the importance of having a training schedule, making sure that the athlete is identifying recovery time, because we focus so much on the training. So how are we bringing recovery into this? Fixing those micro tears that help us build muscles, be stronger, and move forward in a successful way. I think the other thing is providing the emotional support when needed and if needed. And we do that in a way that says, I'm going to support you when things are going really well, and I'm going to stay positive, and I'm going to support you when times are tough, and I'm going to stay positive. And those have been really key factors because that is then helping foster a positive attitude and then therefore positive behaviors from our female athletes. So we're standing with them as opposed to this sense of hierarchy that ultimately happens a lot. There's a lot of power dynamics in female sport. And then when we talk about encouraging autonomy, I love being able to say, like, this is your sport, this is your interest, like, this is what you're pursuing. I will definitely admit that there are times I feel like I have been the overbearing coach or overbearing parent. And a lot of that comes from how I was trained. My coaches were tough on me. I loved it. But I have to recognize that today's generation is learning and living much differently than I am and that I had. So because of that, how can I encourage autonomy, not be overbearing, and then be really patient and understanding with those that I'm working with? And that's what helping build the trust in the relationship. And second strategy, and this is one that I have a lot of fun with, is promoting positive coaching styles, really emphasizing on positive reinforcement when things are done well. Positive coaching, as we all know, promotes an athlete's self-esteem, right? And so therefore it helps improve performance. So I always say, like, when we as supports ask better questions, then we're getting our female athletes to ask themselves better questions as well. So what does that actually mean? We come from a very deficit-based world. Our worldview is what hasn't gone well, how can we improve, where are the gaps? If I say to my daughter, "How was your day?" She's gonna be like, "Oh, it was tough, Mom." Not like, "Oh, this is how it started out and this is what I achieved." It always seems to foster what didn't go well first before what went well. Because we're very critical. We're critical thinkers. It's one of our blessings. It's also one of our curses. So we have to figure out how to balance it. Okay. And so when I say ask better questions, what I'm really saying is, instead of saying, "How did your day go?" with like a very open-ended question, the open-ended question that I'm really trying to ask is, what went well today? And after I ask what went well today, I'm going to ask, what didn't go as well? And if there's anything that didn't go as well, then I'm going to say, what steps can we take to move forward from here? Because the one thing I think that many of us know is working with athletes is when athletes stay stuck, we have a tendency to see people get disinterested, disengaged, they lose their motivation. And so we're really trying to foster this positive sense of engagement and relationship with their sport, with their coaches, with their teammates. So when we ask better questions, we're going to get more effective answers that support positive coaching and positive engagement. So effective communication, clear goal setting, I had mentioned that earlier. I think it's important. There's a lot of coaches right now that are a little timid and a little reluctant to provide constructive feedback because they're worried about how their athletes are going to respond. And that's why I always say, like, always start with what went well, what didn't go well, and then like, where are you going to go from here, creating that plan, because athletes need feedback to grow, to evolve. And I don't think we should avoid that. I think we just have to be really cognizant of how we do it so that we're relying on, and it really helps us do that when we can celebrate these small wins and the big ones, right? That makes the big ones even more exciting. And when I reflect back just on my career, I was a very who's next player. I won a game and that game was over and I wanted to know who I was playing next. And didn't really take a lot of time to celebrate. I was just so hungry for competition and just wanted to win, win, win. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think likely I would have grown a lot more if I was able to sit and kind of do this, what went well, what didn't go well, where do I build from here, instead of just put me in the pool again. So the other thing that's really important, and I'm sure this is something, Monica, that you all are doing, but developing goals together. That's so important. I've walked onto teams, both as an athlete, as a coach, and as a parent, and goals have already been created. These are our goals for the season. And then everyone's like, okay, now how do I live up to those goals, right? Or what do those goals mean to me? So developing those goals together really makes the team has ownership. The athlete has ownership. The coach has ownership. And so when you form a collective, you're creating a team that is going to function together. And that's what it takes to win, right? No team win. We always say there's no I in team, right? Which I think holds true very much when we talk about goal development. The building trust. I think it's really important that we don't always assume that it just exists. We have to foster it, right? And then we're asking those questions that develop a growth mindset, and ultimately we're fair. I didn't think about fairness until I was, towards the end of my playing career. And I think when you are a nationally ranked athlete and always getting the accolade, you never really think about other members of your team that aren't playing, aren't traveling, are struggling with just trying to get some time. You enjoy your time with them, you build up your teammates, but you don't see how you're being treated differently. And so I went to a high school lacrosse game the other day because I know the coach really well. In post game, I was listening to her speech, and she said, "You played really well. You were a rock star. You never let us down." She turned to someone else and she said, "You continue to struggle every day. You're not holding your weight. This is going to be a problem as we get into playoff." And that you could tell the differences of how she was treating each of her players. You could see some players get really excited, and I saw other players just crush before my eyes. And it was devastating. And I said to her afterwards, "Do you feel like you were fair?" She said, "Well, what do you mean?" And so I gave her the examples and I gave her the feedback. And she went back to the players and she corrected it. She made it right. But I think that happens quite often because we do have favorites on our team. And so how can we be more fair and more balanced in how we coach, how we're providing feedback, and how we're parenting as well? And then the third strategy that I always like to talk about is mentorship and role models. And I think this is possible on any team, literally on any team, whether it's a youth team, whether it's a high school team, whether it's a college team or a professional team. But developing opportunities for female athletes to engage in mentorship has proven to be transformative. It is helping athletes develop clear vision, goals, and really understand that with the challenges that come, there is a way through. So it's fostering hope while also yielding a great deal of connection. The interesting thing that I found is that the mentorship doesn't always need to be within the same sport. So that's also something that I found to be, and I've seen that more. I've been doing this with more males in the professional setting that are transitioning into, professional sports. But I've noticed that it doesn't need to be the same sport. So that's something I don't want people to get caught up on, even though there's a lot of benefit to same sport matching. I think the other thing with mentorship is the notion that no one's alone, right? Even when intermittently they may feel alone, promoting accountability, increasing motivation, and making sure that it's available to any female athlete. The one thing we have done at the University of Michigan is we've done an awesome job partnering our female athletes with elementary schools, with other clubs, so that they can serve as role models, right, to the younger generation. I think the other thing is thinking it in the opposite direction. So connecting our female athletes to our alumni network, right? What happens when you level up and go to professional sport, or what happens in life after sport transition? And the other thing I will say that's really important is that when you're creating these mentorship programs, what type of safeguards are you going to have in place? And so we do background checks and things of that nature that we found to be really helpful. And this next one actually isn't a strategy, but this is something that I found to be essential in terms of supporting female athletes. And the reason that I found this so essential is because of the number of female athletes that are likely to experience sexual violence in comparison to male athletes. And so when we look on different professional societies, the recommendations there are about raising awareness, right, for sexual citizenship, knowing what policies and procedures are within that club or within that organization or within that college or university, and educating and having discussions with our female athletes about sexual health and wellness. It's not only deterring sexual violence, but it's also helping our athletes really understand their own sexual identity, their own autonomy, and recognition of future partners. I had a conversation with our coaches just a couple of weeks ago about how there's like an increased number of LGBT athletes coming out at younger ages. And so we really got to start asking ourselves, like, do we need to figure out how this is impacting how we coach, support we provide, or how we engage with LGBT athletes or their teammates? And my response was, we need to ensure that we're promoting a safe environment, right? And so that safety comes from the team and the collective of the team determining what does safety look like and how can we live that? How can we support that? And then My last slide that I'm going to go over for you all today is, I guess, a little bit of part of me that I didn't share at the very beginning. So my name in Anishinaabe-Miwin, which is the language that's native to the land where the University of Michigan resides, is Nigongamukwe-Indishinakaz, and that translates to she who leads woman. And it's interesting because when you think about this notion of leading, I will definitely say I always thought it was the person that was in front of the class, the person that had the most goals, the person that, was the most talkative, always at the front of the pack. And I have learned over my many years, I would say my 40 plus years, keep saying plus, my 40 plus years, that leading has so much more to do with these 7 teachings that I was shared at a very, very, very young age. And without these teachings, I probably would not have been as successful as a female athlete, both on the field and off the field. And so I wanted to make sure that I shared that with all of you today because, these teachings come from Native American practices, in particular, the 3 fires people, which are the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. And when we think about these 7 teachings, I always say, like, we all desire for our children, and I don't just mean like our young ones. I mean like all people to lead a path towards a good life. And in order to do that, we've got to do it together because it literally takes all of us. And so when I think about this holistic, healthy way of living, these 7 things as a coach, as a player, as a teammate, and as a professor are what I bring into every space. And so I'm going to break each of those down of how do you bring them into sport with our athletes. That first one being love, that as a coach or as a performance consultant or just as a supporter parent, that our love truly has to be unconditional as a characteristic that we provide. I always say to ask ourselves, like, are we doing this wholeheartedly? And have we put conditions on it? And when our female athletes are tired, they want to quit, they feel overwhelmed, it's a reminder to me that that's when they need love and care the most, because that's when we start to see female athletes pull away. And so this really can help us accept who they are sincerely and freely. The next one is about respect. It's important. We've got this thing at Michigan where it says expect respect, right? It's like this demand on respect. And I always say, like, it's important for us to demonstrate respect in the value of all people, regardless of how many goals they score. If they're showing up and they're committed to this team, they're a part of it. So for us to be courteous and thoughtful, even when folks might be underperforming, when folks are underperforming, that's a real signal to me. It's almost like an alert goes off, right? Of like, something's not right, right? Something's contributing to this person underperforming. And so I can respect them by giving them time and attention that really fosters respect. And that if we can foster respect, then we can push and challenge our athlete to be brave and to be courageous, even when it's tough, especially when it's tough. And I think if we can promote that courage and amplify a female athlete's personal choices and strengths, that when they're facing difficulties, they're standing tall with adversity. And they're making positive choices. They're doing things that are really generating who they are as an individual and as an athlete. I always say it's important. It's important to tell the truth, right? To our athletes. It's important for our athletes to tell our truth to others. And so when our athletes say things to me like, I'm not any good at that, or I really last weekend, or, I don't know if I'm going to make this next club team, I challenge those untruths, and I do that with evidence. I call it examining the evidence. It's a technique from cognitive behavioral therapy. I say, show me evidence that supports it. Show me evidence that's against that. And I do it in that order. Because I say, tell me what supports it, because it's on the top of their mind. They're going to tell me all the things that they feel like are feeding into why they're not doing well. And then I say, tell me all the things that don't align with that. Then it's actually fostering hope to say, even on tough days, I know that I am training as hard as I can. I'm trying to get as much sleep. I'm eating a balanced diet. I'm showing up every day. All of these things that negate those falsehoods that sometimes come up, which promotes honesty, that critical self-reflection, to be honest with ourselves, to be honest with others. It really helps build the foundation of a team when we can be truthful and honest. The last one is humility. The second to last one is humility. This is where we foster compassion. It's where we become more calm, patient, gentle. And also, when I look at how this helps our female athletes succeed, it's been a place where I've been able to promote balance in their life and for them to create goals that really align with who they are and what their values are. And then the last thing is wisdom. I don't know how many times an athlete will come in and say, like, I just don't know. Like, I don't know what to do next, or, I don't know how to get through this. And I always say, like, let's revisit the challenges that you previously experienced, or I'll say, let's look to other people, or what shared wisdom do we have together, so that we're really brainstorming and using our knowledge and our intelligence to make a path forward. This is kind of the closing on this. There's a firm belief that, like, we are where we are today because of the 7 generations that came before us. And if we act in accordance with these teachings, it will impact the 7 generations to follow. And what do you want for those in the future? And that has helped our student athletes recognize that this is bigger than just themselves. It's helped them create an opportunity to build on their future as athletes and to build on, their roles as citizens and contributors to society. And so this brings this quote from Julie, who's just a rock star. But life doesn't just happen. You happen to life. You decide how you want to write your story. And I ask my athletes all the time, what story do you want to create? And it creates an opportunity for them to really look inside and see who they are, what they want. And then together we figure out how we're going to get there. Because I truly believe that when we create the goals, like, we've got a pathway to do it. And then just questions. Sharing your screen.
I got one for you.
Awesome. Hey, Paul.
It's a little, I'm gonna be honest, it's kind of tough and it's a little bit deep. But being a former, like, Division I athlete, like, obviously Division I athletes, and you talk about people quitting sports early, people get fixated on being Division I, and at a certain point, if you feel you're not Division I, you're gonna quit. Obviously, you have to be an outlier of skill to be a Division I sport or Division I athlete. How do you maybe more so get focused on being an outlier and a master of having joy and in the work ethic? Because when you're a young athlete too, we're, ages 8 to 15, you don't always want to do the extra work or go train with your mom or dad. So it's like, how do you foster and create that environment where you want to do the work and it doesn't feel like work, it is fun? But then as you get older, obviously it becomes more work. It's just that constant of trying to reinforce the focus on being a hard worker, the focus on continuing to try, as opposed to focus on just being a Division I.
Right. Yeah. I think it comes back to the goal setting. What are your goals and how do we get there? And then utilizing those strategies, like connecting to mentors. That's huge for any athletes, male or female, non-binary. It's so important to be able to say, even in those times where you're like, maybe you just want to go spend the night at your friend's house, right? Instead of going to the extra training session, how can you find the balance, right? I think about this often as a parent, Colin. My daughter will say, oh, my friends are, they're having a sleepover, they're having a birthday party. And I say, you've got a tournament. And she'll be like, well, I'm missing these things. And I'll say, well, what types of accommodations can we make? Can we take your friends out to dinner, when we get back from the tournament? Or is there something else special that you can do with them? So it's trying to find a balance so that it's not like they have to choose between. Our youth athletes can have both. We just have to be more creative with how to get there. And I think that will keep them more engaged. The other thing too, I think, has a lot to do with motivation, right? How important is it to them? So I always scale that on a scale of 0 to 10, right? How important is this to you? And how confident are you that you'll be able to reach it? Because that lets me know what types of strategies and skills I can utilize through motivational interviewing to really get our female athletes to stay committed, stay engaged, and fulfill their goals. And they're not my goal, they're their goal. So that motivational interviewing, those strategies for motivational interviewing and techniques have been essential to keeping folks engaged long term. And the other thing is have balance. That's so important. I will say I didn't want the balance when I was a youth athlete. If I could spend all day training, I would. That's what I desired to do. Whether it was healthy or not, I was having fun. I was testing myself. I was super, super competitive and absorbed. And, I don't know any differently, so I can't say whether it was helpful or unhelpful, but I will say in hindsight, I think having the balance could have been helpful for other folks that were really struggling and ultimately ended up quitting early.
I don't want to take up everyone's time. I would follow up because how you just described yourself is exactly how I was. So it's like how much of that is natural versus how much of that is developed through parenting and coaching, because you could never get me off the field, off the court, whatever it was. Like my parents had to fight to like get me to come home from practice, get me to come inside, things of that nature. So like how much of that was natural versus how much of that was through my parents or coaching.
Yeah. I think it's probably a combination of everything, right? We stay motivated when we have coaches that are invested in them, when we have parents that are supportive of us. When we feel like that wavers, we can see a shift in commitment from the athlete. And so making sure developmentally that I think we're staying on track with where the athlete's at and what their desires are is key. And I think it's also okay to say, not everybody's got to go Division 1, right? I don't know how many folks I know that went to HBCUs, NAIA, D2, D3, went and played club rec sport and had the time of their life. And so it's maybe we've got to kind of reduce some of the stigma around how we have tiered looking at sport so that we really can foster that sport is universal.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one. I think Monica talked about control the controllables, and so did you. But what do you do about like external factors, right? And I think we talk about like just the languaging and how coaches kind of talk to their players, right? The player can't control that. Obviously, the kids have to control how they react to it. But I think there's also this kind of feeling like, in our experience, like the coach was unable to kind of address the drama that went on the team. And I think that impacted like my daughter's experience, right? And how she didn't want to go on anymore because, I understand the competitiveness and the drama, I guess, between the girls, the teenagers at that moment. But I also feel like there was a point where the coach was not able to even recognize or understand that he had to kind of set the tenor of what was acceptable in the team. So I'm talking about that's an uncontrollable, but I don't know how do you, it is you can control your reaction to it, but if it's persistent, day after day, week over the season, it's just hard.
Yeah, I think that's where I always say, like, we've got to rely on our additional resources. And in that situation, particularly the resource becomes the parents, right?
Right.
So we can call people out or we can, do all those things there. It's pretty ineffective. So I always say, like, we should call in before we call out. Like, call people in for a conversation to say, this is what I'm observing. What are your thoughts on it? It's not coming in and saying, like, shame on you, you're not doing, what's going to help these young athletes develop and evolve. But it's saying, this is what I'm seeing, and engage in a conversation. Call them in for a conversation to saying, what might be a pathway forward, right? That's why we have, like a manager on the team or, point parent on the team to be able to engage in those conversations with coaches that ultimately are struggling to navigate the dynamics of the team. And some of that is just where, where children are developmentally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can't wait till my daughter's done with middle school. Drama at middle school, I don't know how I'm going to make it sometime. But I think so often it's, our kids hormonally are experiencing different things, developmentally, their bodies are changing. And then you've got a coach that's trying to navigate all of these things and teach technique and teach,
Yeah.
life lessons. And I think that's why when I go back to, it really takes all of us having a conversation with a coach to say, like, I'm coming to you at a place of care and concern, and I'm wondering how I can help. Or I'm wondering if there's something that we can do as parents to support you and our children, because no coach wants to get called out.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't feel good, especially a lot of our coaches, youth coaches are underpaid and overworked. Some of them are volunteers,
Yeah. A lot of volunteers.
a
Yeah.
lot of volunteers. And so, I think, it's fair to say that they wouldn't show up as coaches if they didn't care. And so sometimes there just needs to be an opportunity to recalibrate.
So so my follow on to that is like a lot of what I'm hearing is also like this kind of, it takes a village, right? There's the coach, the parents, and the players. And so like there's no magic wand to kind of get everyone to work together, but like how do you kind of see it coming together well? Like is like what's the role of the coach to do that, and what's the role of the parent to do that? And
Sure. I mean, I'll speak a little bit directly to our football program. You don't win a national championship just kind of showing up. Our coach, Jim Harbaugh, loved those guys and he loved their families. And he told them regularly. It was genuine, it was authentic, it was unconditional. And the more consistent he was, the more vocal he was about being available, being supportive, being engaged, that it literally was going to take every single person in that building and outside of that building to win the championship. People bought in. And people bought in because not just they wanted to win, but they wanted to do it together. So from our parents to our support staff to our athletes that trained and worked their butts off every moment that they got, it took everyone. And it was our coach that set the stage on that. And I stand firm on that, and I think everyone would agree.
yeah. So Abigail, thank you so much. This was great for me. I hope everyone else enjoyed it. I want to respect everyone's time. We're almost at the top of the hour, but let's take one last call around. Is there any other questions that anyone might have? No? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Glad to see you here, and we'll keep announcing future workshops, and maybe we'll have Abigail back again.
Sounds good. Take care, y'all. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, everyone.